Hi, it's February 12th. I finished this dress on time, but I never picked up the camera again to finish filming any of it. I had stopped filming initially because I was running out of time both for Halloween and for some trips that I was going on that I wanted to get pictures of the dress for, and so I prioritized finishing the dress and not filming, and then actually getting the video done for it just kept getting pushed back. I'll do that next week, I'll do that next week, and then it never happened until now. It's 2 weeks away until the Foundations Revealed competition closes completely. My submission is already in, but I wanted to get these, I promised myself I would get these videos finished by then. So right now we have 2 videos that we're going to do. I'm going to finish showing you what I did with the dress, and then I'm going to go over all of the accessories for the dress and how I made those. So I'm very, very sorry about how haphazard and compiled and choppy this video might be. Please stick with me while we manage it.
The first thing I had to do was decide how the dress was going to look. This I accomplished by scanning through hours and hours of Pinterest to determine all of the different styles of the 1830s and figure out how I wanted to compile them together for my pumpkin dress. Once my dress was designed and the fabric chosen, I decided to start on the sleeves because 1830 sleeves are my absolute favorite thing to make, and I think they're so easy, and here's how. You start with measuring from your wrist all the way to your armpit and then create a curve. Next, you're going to want to measure from your wrist to your elbow. Mine is about 11 inches. The next measurement you'll want is around your wrist. You're going to want to make sure that there's plenty of room for your hand to slip in and out. Mine's just about 7 inches. The next measurement you're going to want to take is around your elbow. Make sure that you bend it so that you can actually move your arm. Trust me, this is a mistake I've made in the past, and it's not a fun one. Sorry for the blurry footage, but it's about 11 inches. One thing you're going to want to make sure that you do is to half the circumference measurements, so the measurements that go around your wrist and your elbow, when putting them on the pattern. The next measurement you'll want to get is from your elbow to your armpit. Mine's just about 8.5 inches. Once those measurements are drawn in place, you can connect the new measurement from the elbow to the armpit and cut off just that little slice. That way the wrist length to the elbow is a little bit longer. Once that's done, you'll see where you're supposed to cut in that straight line, which gives you this nice A shape, which you're going to sew along. Once that's done, you can turn it inside out and then gather around the entire circle. This is going to make what sits up at the arm's eye and gives you that giant puff. Next, I unfolded my fabric, making sure that the correct side of it was facing up. This is a tablecloth that's got a pattern to it, and depending which side you choose, it's either the majority of it is shiny with a dull pattern, or the majority of it is dull with a shiny pattern. And I preferred the shiny pattern with the primarily dull fabric around it, and I had to very meticulously ensure that everything was going the correct direction, or else I would have a very big problem on my hands. The best way to add seam allowance to this kind of pattern where you're putting it on a fold is to just put the bottom edge of the pattern a few extra centimeters or inches, however much seam allowance you want to add, up from the fold. Keep in mind that the fold is going to double in size, so you don't need to put it a very long way away from it to get more than you're potentially expecting to get. After I cut out the fabric, I proceeded to sew up the A shape of the sleeves with a French seam. This helped to ensure that my very prone to raveling fabric did not indeed unravel completely. When you decide to French seam, you're going to want to make sure that you add a little bit more seam allowance so that you have enough to turn that seam under and stitch it again. If you don't, then it'll take up too much room and you won't be able to get your arm in the sleeve. However, with large skirt panels, like I did for this skirt as well, you could probably fudge it a little bit more with not having to add as much seam allowance since it's such a big thing anyway. I realized that I never showed how to construct a French seam. I talked about it, but I never showed it. So here's how. It's very, very simple, and it's very, very helpful. It saves a lot of time felling seams. So you've got your fabric, you've got your right side and your wrong side, and you want to join these together so that the seam is hidden on the wrong side. Well, first you're going to want to be a little bit counterintuitive, and you're going to want to pin them together wrong sides facing, which is not usually how you make a seam. After that, you're going to want to stitch along there. After you've stitched those together, you're going to want to iron it nice and flat, choosing one side to iron this to. Next, you're going to want to take nice sharp scissors and cut as close as you can without damaging the seam right along there, so that you get the smallest bit of seam allowance you can. Just like that. Then you're going to turn your fabric, fold it, and I find most success when I iron it again like this. It gives you a very nice crisp edge. Then you're going to pin it, being sure not to catch the raw edge on the inside, because if you do, that means it'll poke through your seam and you'll get these little fibers that you either have to painstakingly cut off or out of the seam, or you have to undo the seam and do it again. So you're going to pin it like that and then sew along there. Once that's done, you have a nice encased seam without raw edges. Iron it flat and you have a nice, beautiful seam on the outside. Now back to our previously scheduled program. The next thing that I did was work on the stupidly simple armbands that I had go around my upper arm, just under the puff. It consists of a green velvet ribbon that's frayed along the edges, and some lace that I'm currently now stitching on. I did not film making the cuffs, so I'll just go over it now. I took two rectangles that were about the same size as my wrist because I knew I wanted them to V out like this. And with how much fatter my arm gets as you go up toward the elbow, I knew it was going to naturally pull apart when it started sloping at my wrist. I took 2 rectangles and ironed them flat and hand stitched the lace and piping in between the seams because I wanted it to be really close and really fine. As you can see, I then stitched it by hand into the cuff and then added a velvet bow. I used 2 running stitches to gather the sleeve head. It took quite a bit of time and finagling, and my gathering thread snapped once or twice, so I didn't film it. Okay, so one major thing I need to do is rework this bodice pattern a little bit. I've pinned the strap so it sits a little bit more with the angle of the grain. I need to curve this a bit more than to fit this piece that I'm going to try and make one piece, I think, although I might not because I do want piping in the front, so it might just be easier to keep that a separate piece. And then I need to make this strap much wider. I don't know how this worked with my Mary Shelley dress because it's just so thin, so tiny, but it did. But I want to make it just a little bit, maybe an inch wider, and we'll see how that goes. I ended up cutting out the lining, the fabric, sewing them together and putting the piping in between the seams, all off camera, so I'm very sorry about that. As you can see, I've ironed all the seams flat now. I've pinned in the front tucks. Hush, Gregory. As you can see, I've put the piping in, and it's looking very pretty, I think. I'm really excited about how the piping looks in the seams. So this is what we've got going so far. It's fitting really nicely, and I don't have any stays on here because I'm not planning on actually wearing stays with this dress, which doesn't give me quite the right silhouette, but I think it'll be okay, especially once I add some padding up here at the top and under the arm. I don't think anybody is going to notice that I'm not wearing stays. From here on out, I did not get any more footage while making the bodice, so I'm just gonna show it off here. As you can see, the darts in the front I hand sewed. I put piping down the center and around the neckline and finished it off with lace, which I think makes it pop really nicely. I put piping down the sides as well and along the seams of the back. I finished off the closure with hooks and bars that are honestly a pain to get off this mannequin, but they worked really well. I hand stitched all of that in, which took forever. As you can see, I put piping in the back seams as well, and I added these large leaves. I then stitched the sleeve into the bodice, which took forever. It's a lot of sleeve to go in such a small arm's eye, but once it's all put together, the finished product for an 1830s dress looks incredible. Once the bodice was finished, I could move on to my second most important part of this dress, which was the skirt portion. The reason I say second most important is because I already had a skirt in this fabric that I thought I could use if I didn't have time to finish the skirt for my trips. I ended up unpicking the skirt completely and putting in French seams, which helped because the fabric was fraying terribly on the inside. I then did knife pleats all to the inside, so they were all pointing toward the middle. I ended up putting a rather thick waistband on the skirt because I knew since the bodice and skirt were going to be separate, I wanted enough room to be able to pin them together so that they wouldn't ride up and show any of my underpinnings. I used this 1780s bum roll for my 1830s dress. It might have not been perfect for the era, but I thought it worked really well. After all of that was finished, I put it on my mannequin with all of the underpinnings and measured from the floor to where I wanted the hem, which was about maybe 5 inches off the ground, turned it up and sewed it with the machine, and it worked beautifully.
So here is a little bit of a better example of what I'm aiming for. I'm going to have this be the bronze color of the dress, this be cut out into the shapes of leaves out of green, and then, like I said, I'm going to have kind of a ruffle, puffy bit around my neck here, which I think is going to be really cute.
I ended up draping the pelerine myself rather than trying to find a pattern so that it would more perfectly fit my shoulders and the large sleeves. I knew that it would go over them nice and smoothly. Draping this pelerine was really very easy because it was just taking it in at the neck and shoulders to give it that slope so that it actually sat across them, and then just cutting the shape to fit the back. It was really only that one line across either shoulder, those almost tucks, to make it fit along the neck, and that was it.
So in making this, it came out with some rather oddly shaped pieces, as you can see. So we've got the base pelerine, and then we've got the upper collar of the pelerine. And I might have been able to do this more as just a very long, fat rectangle, but I was having a hard time making that sit correctly on the mannequin neck, and I was worried I would have it then wrinkle oddly for me, so I just decided to do the same kind of, not gore, dart, I suppose, at the shoulder that I did on the large section of the pelerine. So now the next steps would be to cut this out of the base material and, I suppose, start piping.
Once all of the pattern pieces were cut out, I used chalk to outline where the darts were going to be taken up, and then I went along and pinned them and stitched them in place, sewing them as evenly as I could. It was a little hard because the grain of the fabric was slightly off, so one side wanted to stretch a little bit more than the other, but if you use enough pins, this shouldn't be too big of a problem. After I had it all stitched in place, I cut open the seam and ironed them flat so that I wouldn't have any strange lumps around my neck. I hand-pinned the piping along all of the edges of the pelerine, where then I sandwiched the lining in between.
Alright, so the process of piping is not very complicated, but it stresses me out, so I didn't film it. Basically what you do is you take the two layers of your fabric, the top fashion layer and then the lining layer, and in between you sandwich the piping, but you have to make sure that the piping is, when they're sandwiched together, facing this way. So when it's sewn and turned inside out, you've got the piping on the correct side. There are two ways of doing the piping, where you could sandwich it together and then flip it like bag lining, or what I didn't do because it takes longer, you just iron down all of your seams and you top stitch the lining into place, which I might do for the larger capelet bit of the pelerine just because it's so big, and like I said, bag lining stresses me out.
I did indeed decide to hand stitch the larger portion of the pelerine, and you can see me ironing the edges of the pelerine down here. This is much more time consuming than bag lining, but I find it gives a very nice finish, and it's much less worrisome when you're dealing with such odd shapes.
So this is what I meant when I was talking about flat lining. You iron the edges under, and then you pin the piping on, and then the lining underneath.
This is the finished project. I ran out of time to make the ruffle lace collar that I initially wanted to make, but I did have this vintage lace collar in my stash that I tacked on around the edge. I finished it off with a loop and button closure at the neck, as well as a little velvet ribbon to match my other accessories. I never got any video of this dress. However, we went to a handful of locations, such as Williamsburg and the Greenbrier, and took a lot of really fun pictures, and I hope you enjoy them.
By the milk light of moon, all that was lost is revealed. Our long bygone burdens, mere echoes of the spring. But where have we come, and where shall we end? If dreams can't come true, then why not pretend? How the gentle wind beckons through the leaves as autumn colors fall.